Hey guys, welcome to Precision Machine Shed. Today what I have is a review or kind of an overview of an Enco model 110-1351. So this is a 13x40 metal lathe with a gap bed. It's a gearhead lathe. I picked this one up thinking potentially replace it with my Clausings, but after having it, I decided to keep my Clausing just because it's a bigger machine. So some of the main points of this machine, like I said, it's a 13-inch swing by 40-inch between centers, which is a nice size lathe for a lot of home shops. If I didn't have my 14x48 Clausing, I would absolutely keep this thing because, I mean, for what it is, it's a nice machine. These aren't going to be everyday production machines, but for the home shop guy or the light production guy, this should do everything you would ever want it to do. This particular machine was made in May of 2000. It did come from China. It is unfortunately not a Taiwanese lathe. The guy I bought this from used it very little. He bought it new back in 2000, and for what he did, this machine got very little use. And as you can tell, it's all the paint and everything's in really good shape, and everything on it is in very good shape. So I'm just going to go over a few of the highlights of these machines. They don't sell this particular machine anymore, and of course Enco became MSC. But they do sell basically the same exact lathe, just a little different head configuration, a little different gear change configuration now. I believe Grizzly sells a 14x40 and Belay and Precision Matthews and a lot of those companies. They're basically the same bones, same machine. They just change a few things here and there. But I would be willing to bet the castings are all basically the same. Let's start at the top of the headstock here. So this, of course, is a gearhead lathe. And one of the benefits of this machine actually is that it has a fairly short spindle bore from the chuck side to the outboard spindle side, which would allow, if you want to do like gunsmithing stuff, this would be a nice gunsmithing lathe. Do a few modifications to it and it would be great for that. And many guys do use them for that. But here up top is your gear selectors, and there is a spindle speed chart here. The spindle speeds is driven off a two-step V-belt pulley off the main motor. And so, of course, like in old South Bend, you put it on one side, you get one speed, and you put it on the second side, you get another set of speeds. This machine in total has 18 speeds, so 9 speeds in high, 9 speeds in low. And of course you got ABC 1, 2, 3, and those give you, between that and your two-step V-belt, give you every speed that you would want on this machine that it's capable of. And there are your available spindle speeds. As you can see, here's the two-step V-belt pulley from the motor to the head. Outboard is 1 and inboard is 2, and then it gives you 9 speeds in each. So you can go anywhere from 60 RPMs all the way up to, I believe it is 1550 RPMs on this particular machine. It's a little slower than you'd kind of expect for a larger machine like this, but then again, usually the larger machine you get, the slower it gets. But some of the newer lathes, they go up 2000 plus RPM on even some of the bigger machines. So this is a tad bit on the slow end, so you'd kind of like it to go up around 2000, if not a little more, just if you want to run some carbide or something like that. And then of course here's your control panel. So this is kind of how this guy runs, but reset switch, emergency shut off, and I have it turned, it's powered up right now, it's plugged in, so if you want to turn this thing on, you hit power start, you'll hear it click in the back. I'll show you again. You could hear the relay switch back there, and then it does have a inching function or a jog button, so we can jog it, which is handy. And of course the light on this guy is probably burnt out, and I'm not taking it apart. It just screws off and you can replace that bulb, but it's not a big deal. I'm not worrying about it. So then you want to power this thing down, you hit the reset, you can tap it or you can push it all the way in, and then to reset it you twist it, of course, and it pops out. Pretty simple. The one thing I did notice on this particular lathe when changing through the gears, that it is a little finicky on where you have the gear selectors exactly, especially the middle gear. You got to spin the chuck a little bit and make sure that it's You can see I'm spinning the chuck. Make sure that it's in gear. Otherwise, you may end up outside of a gear and grind the gears, which you never want to do. So, but once you I kind of used it a little bit, so you get the hang of it, kind of where you can feel where it's engaged and when it's not engaged, like there. You can feel them kind of clunk into place. So. And then right below our speed selectors is our forward and reverse on the lead screw and the power feed. So depending on which way you have it, you're going to send the lead screw, the power feed, forward or reverse. Alright, going back down below your control panel here, this is your, like many of these Chinese, Taiwanese lathes, you have a selector lever for between the lead screw and the power feed screw. So if you want to run one or the other without doing excessive wear on them, pretty standard for these types of machines. And then going down just a little bit, old school style South Bend / whoever you want to call, invented the lever gearbox, but typical lever gearbox like on a South Bend or a Sheldon or many other lathes. I'm sure Pratt and Whitney or somebody else like that came up with this before South Bend did, but pretty simple. A, B, C, D, E, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then all of your English thread pitches there. And these do have an English 8 threads per inch lead screw on them. You should get a fairly accurate inch thread on there. And of course there are all your metric threads. You have 2 change gears here that you're going to be switching out, F and or G, and then you have an 80 tooth in the middle, which is same. You have 240s and an 80 for your standard threads. So F gear and the G gear corresponds with this chart right here. So if you run an F up here, that could be a 25, 26, 43, 46, 47, and a G, 60. Your G is going to be your 60 tooth gear. So you got to kind of sit here and figure out which pitch thread you want to do, and then do the corresponding gears. And then I just found this just now. I didn't even think about it, but the side cover here has your feed rates. And because I was cutting some metal the other day, and I was like, well, I wonder how I can get the feed rate that I wanted. But here it is. Tells you what you want. ABC on the gearbox. And with your 80 and your 240s, this is going to give you your feed rates. One thing to note here on the Spindle, this is kind of the grizzly gunsmithing rage thing, where everybody wanted a, lathe where they can turn a barrel on. So everybody wanted outboard spiders. But this one, it is internally threaded. Don't ask me what the internal threads is. I'm sure it's all over the internet. It's probably metric. And then they also give you a tiny little bit of room if you want to leave the cover on. You can fashion up your own. I've done several videos on them. Fashion up your own outboard spider, clamp it on here, and then have your screws sticking just outside the cover here. 1.5 inch bore, which is very nice on this machine to have that capability. Here's looking on the gear train side. When I first opened this thing up, I was a little bit surprised to see a plastic gear in there. So your 80 tooth gear is a plastic gear. There is another large gear in the toolbox, which I'm not sure. It might be a steel 80 tooth. And it kind of looks like it is a steel 80 tooth. So why they have this plastic one on there, I'm not sure. Seems kind of like a joke to put a plastic gear on a machine like this. Outside of that, steel gears, steel dual step pulley on the motor, and the motor on this machine has been replaced with a marathon motor. So it's a, the original ones, I think they had the option to come with a US motor, but a lot of them came with like a, don't quote me on the manufacturer, but it was a, a Chinese motor on there, and some of them work, some of them crap out right away. It's kind of a crapshoot with the motors on some of the older ones. The newer ones I think are better, and if you buy it from a Grizzly or Precision Matthews, I can't remember what Precision Matthews uses, but if you get a new one and your motor goes out, they will replace it for you. This machine is also set up with a gap bed, which many of these machines that come out of China or Taiwan are set up as gap beds. I don't know what the big appeal is with that, but I guess some people like it. So many of these machines that I've seen, most people don't even bother taking these out. I've heard issues of trying to get them lined back up after you take them out. I have not personally experienced that, but that's what I've heard. So of course 13-inch swing, and then the gap starts right here, and they do a very good job of matching the ways up. There are 4 screws in here that you remove, and then there's 2 locating pins. I don't know how, they're not solid pins, they're kind of like a split pin, but the key to, if you ever take one of these out, I would come in here with like a Dremel or something, or a little small disc, and cut a line in there, because and down the front here, because they usually, what ends up happening is a few that these that I've seen taken apart, people go in there and knock them out, and it'll break, because they usually put Bondo and filler in here. It'll break all the, chip all the paint away, and it'll look like crap through here. So I'd take a, you know, some sort of a cutting, even a sharp utility knife several times if you can get it straight in there, and try and cut through that so it looks nice when you take it apart, if you have to ever take it apart. Up on the chuck side, this is a new enough one to have a D14 spindle, which is very nice and extremely handy for you know, running this thing however you want to run it, I guess. The only goofy thing is here, when I first got it, I was using the chuck key to try and do this, but as you can see, lift it up here, it doesn't fit. So I was kind of bummed about that, but then I noticed that they sent this little guy. That is your cam wrench. So that goes in there, and you know, you do that with it. But I would much rather have a T-wrench like this. So if I had this machine and I kept it long term, I would probably make a longer one of these just so I can use it, because it's so what I'm used to. And then you don't have to have 2 of these wrenches flopping around. But other than that, it's pretty standard, you know, Chinese manufacturer chuck. This thing also comes with a 4-jaw chuck. The 4-jaw chuck is still in the box from the previous owner. He never opened it, never used it. Didn't even know it was there when I got it from him till we found it in there. These, of course, can easily be upgraded with any old standard Bison or buck chuck or something like that. Rome. Looking at the compound assembly, this is the tool post that came with it originally. Kind of somewhat indexable. Standard 4-position. And they're actually pretty decent 4-position posts. They work extremely well if you like using them. They work. The one thing about this compound that I'm just boggles my mind. Looking down here at the degree index, this is all they have. From here all the way back to here. And the mark is right here. So currently this thing is set up at a hair under 30 degrees to the workpiece for threading. But our index is way back here. It's off of our chart. So why they didn't take the time and put like maybe another one on the other side and another index mark, or all the way around, you know, cost cutting factors. So what I did is I very carefully lined this thing up, took a bunch of measurements, and I peened a mark on the side here. So that, you probably can't see it, but there's a mark there. So that gives us our, you know, right at the edge of my fingernail there, 30 degrees. So then we're able to get a proper read on where this should be in relation to our workpiece. When I got this thing, it was set at 0 on the index mark, so it was straight across. The guy probably never used it. So there are scraping marks. They actually did go through and scrape this cross slide in, as you can see there. How accurate it is, they tend to be a little less accurate than your standard US made machine from back in the day, but fairly good enough to get, it's a pretty smooth run, and there's, you know, no movement in the compound or the cross slide, so it's enough to make it, you know, they did a decent job on it. And this is kind of a first. I have never seen a clear window over the cross slide shaft and gear, but I guess if you want to sit there and look at that while you're working on something, I guess that's for you. And then looking at all of our dials, we have both inch and metric, which is kind of handy. There is, you know, on this particular machine, I'm not sure if there's if you can move this. There is a set screw down there, but I don't know if that's you know, permanently set or what the deal is, but pretty smooth operation. Runs good. Same thing with the cross slide. Same thing with our main hand wheel on the apron here. You've got a inch and metric, although it's not very, you know, it's just kind of a very coarse adjustment, but I guess you get 1,001, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So it's pretty coarse, but it might actually give you fairly, you know, relative. You want to stick an indicator on there, but probably gives you fairly accurate measurement if you're just kind of roughing stuff out. Apron assembly, pretty standard stuff. You got your main hand wheel, your cross slide and longitudinal feed for the power feed, and then your half nut. I may have had this backwards, but that's, you know, cross feed and longitudinal. And then of course your threading dial over there. Pretty standard stuff. Here's a filler cap up top here for the oil in the apron. However, there is no window to see how much oil you have in there, so I think you just got to drain it and then fill up however much is supposed to be in there, which I don't even know if they specify that in the manual, but maybe just dump it in until it overflows. I don't know. That's probably not right either. But and the tailstock's pretty standard. Quill lock and the actual lock for the whole tailstock assembly, which these camming levers are nice, and this one's set up perfect, so it's nice and tight. A lot of these new ones, they put half inch square drives on them, so you can torque it to a certain spec for like Gunsmiths. I guess that's supposed to be a accurate way to clamp your tailstock down every time. Other than that, we have again graduated measurements on the tailstock. Get that out of there. Tailstock assembly. So you can kind of, again, it's just a rough idea. Some of these, like some of the old South bends, tend to be pretty accurate. I cannot say how accurate these are, but you know, as always, if you want to get down to the thousands for sure, you put an indicator on there. And then of course each side you have a cabinet to store your random stuff in there, which it's just empty. There's no shelves or nothing in there. Pretty standard with these machines. Although this particular one is a little heavier gauge steel than like the 12 by 36s. They tend to be a little lighter and flimsier, although for this machine I would want a heavier base for it. But this cabinet seems to hold the thing up, so not the most rigid thing in the world as far as cabinets and bases go, but it does the job. Alright, so I'm going to take a little test cut. I believe this is cold rolled steel, and I just have a carbide brazed insert in there, and so we're just going to take I'm going to take a 20 thousandths cut here at I don't know what my feed rate is here, but 1200 RPMs, and we'll see how this thing does. I cut it the other day. It's a square tip on the end of the bit here, so it's not going to leave a super nice finish, but I did this the other day and it leaves an okay finish. And I'm not going to pull it out of there and regrind it, so just a test cut here. So that looked pretty decent finish. Let's do those 20 thousandths. Let's do 30 thousandths cut. Let's see how that thing does. Chewed right through it. Should we try a 50 thou cut? Bogged her down a little bit. Let's try a 60 thousandths cut. There, I'm out of material, so that worked pretty good. It chewed right through that. Left a nice finish on all the cuts too. You can take a pretty hefty cut with this. Look at that. That's a thick chip. Alright. So some overall impressions on this guy if somebody's out looking at something like this. For the money, it's a pretty decent machine. You can usually pick these up used in the $2 to $3 grand range, depending on what kind of shape they're in and what's with them. Like I said, they came with a 3-jaw, 4-jaw, I think it's a 15 or a 17-inch faceplate, the tailstock chuck, the tool post, a steady rest, a follower rest, the change gears for metric, an extra set of jaws for the 3-jaw and probably the 4-jaw, and then a few random tools, some dead centers, and a Morse taper adapter. This is a Morse taper 5, and the adapter is a Morse taper 5 to 3 sleeve, and a Morse taper 3 on the tailstock. I mean, if I didn't have my Classing, I would probably keep this thing. One of the reasons I'm keeping my Classing over this one is because my Classing is in really good shape yet. It's got the variable drive, which I like, and it's still working great. It is a heavier machine. It outweighs this thing by about 400 or 500 pounds, and it's a 14 by 48 instead of a 13 by 40. So everything that I would ever want to do on it, I should be able to do. The only downside, like say my Classing versus this one, is the measurement between the headstock and back end, or the measurement through the spindle, is less on this machine than it is on like my Classing. So if you had this thing set up with an aluminum plate, I'll show you here. Here's a plate I made up for my Classing. It's got 4 screws on it, so it's basically like a little 4-jaw. There's 4 screws in here, so I can shorten up my distance between, so I can do a shorter barrel. So on that machine with that plate, I can do about a 20 3/4, 21-inch barrel. In this thing, if you have a plate like that, you could probably pull off, a 18-inch barrel. So it's about 3 inches shorter, which, it adds up. When you're doing short barrels, it's handy, like if you're doing an AR barrel or something like that. A vast majority of the barrels that I do for my own rifles are usually 26 plus, so I'm not too worried about that for my needs. But overall, I mean, if you run across one of these things and they're in decent shape and they're not all beat up, fairly decent buy. For not a lot of money, you can get into a machine that you can do barrel work on if you want to do barrel work, or whatever you're doing, your farm or whatever. You can do inch metric threading, which is a plus, which I can't do on my Classing at this time. And it takes up a fairly small footprint. We should probably take a measurement here. So front to back, it's approximately 30 inches, and lengthwise it is 69 inches. And height and back is approximately, I'm not going to say approximate, but 49 inches, about 4 feet. So for bang for the buck, it's not a bad deal. The one big downside to these things, of course, like any less expensive metalworking machine, is the headstock mounting to the base or the bed. I've taken a 12 by 36 one of these apart, and it'll scare you to death if you take them apart, and you will probably never get it back together the way it came apart. The reason being, when they mount these headstocks on there, and a lot of the Taiwanese lathes are the same thing, but the Taiwanese lathes, they tend to fit them a little better. The China-made ones, in general, and the one I took apart was a China-made one, it's the bottom of this headstock is flat, and the base for the headstock to sit on the bed is flat as well. So it's just one big flat casting. And what they do is they fit them to each other by basically taking an angle grinder and grinding down the high spots until they get it lined up to where it fits. They don't scrape them in. They can be scraped in, but you know, most guys aren't going to do that. And the amount of time that would take to do it is, you're not going to gain a ton over what it's set at from the factory. I don't think. You might, but the thing about it is you never really want to take one of these off because they're going to be hard to get back in. They're not indexed at all. They're just 4 bolts holding them to the bed. So I would never ever take one of these headstocks off here if I didn't have to. One thing I forgot to mention, that this machine is currently wired for 220 volt single phase. It can also be rewired for 110 volt single phase. It's kind of a mess in there, but I have figured it out once before, and don't ask me to do it again. For a machine this big, I'd leave it at 220. I wouldn't bother going 110. My overall impression on this machine, for the money, it's a pretty good machine. It's hard to beat. If you can pick one up for a couple, 2-3 grand, you know, they're a good machine if you have all the tooling with it. The 3-jaw, 4-jaw, and a steady rest, you can do a lot with that, and a good tailstock chuck. Get yourself a quick change on there, and this is a nice machine. So there's kind of my opinion of these 13x40, you know, import lathes. For what they are, they're decent, but you got to understand that they're not going to be a Monarch or something like that, or even like an older Clausing when they were new. They were, you know, 5 times the machine this thing was. But for the average everyday hobby guy, this is an excellent machine. And if I didn't have my Clausing, I would have this thing. So there you go. Hope you guys enjoyed that. I hope you got something out of it. As always, stay safe on your machines and shoot safe. I'll see you guys next time. Thanks for watching. So that left a pretty decent finish.